On the 14th of October, 1887, the residents of Montana's Bitterroot Valley gathered at the train station to mock the new arrival. They knew Bo Holloway, a man broken by grief and hardened by the land, had not asked for a wife. They expected the woman stepping off that train to last less than 24 hours against Holloway's feral children and the brutality of the frontier. They were wrong. The woman who arrived wasn't a damsel. She was a match looking for a fuse. By the end of her first week, she wouldn't just be washing dishes. She would be holding a Winchester against the most powerful man in the territory. This is the story of Leighton Coulter. The Union Pacific steam engine hissed like a dying dragon, spewing soot into the gray Montana sky before screeching to a halt. The platform at Hamilton was little more than weathered planks warping under the damp chill of autumn. Leighton Coulter smoothed the front of her serge travel dress. It was navy blue, practical, and stiff, much like Leighton herself. She picked up her single leather valise. It contained everything she owned: 2 changes of clothes, a Bible she rarely read, and a small, heavy wooden box she kept locked at all times. She stepped onto the platform, the wind immediately biting at her exposed cheeks. The town was small, a collection of false-fronted buildings clinging to the earth as if afraid the wind would scour them away. But it was the crowd that gave her pause. A dozen men leaned against the station wall, chewing tobacco and watching her with predatory amusement. "That her?" one man muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Looks like a stiff breeze would snap her in half." "Bo ain't gonna like this," another chuckled. "He ain't gonna like this one bit." Leighton ignored them, her eyes scanning the mud-churned street. She was looking for a man described in the letters only as Holloway. The correspondence had been brief, arranged by a mutual acquaintance in Street Lewis. Widower. 3 children. Solvency assured. Needs a mother. Not a lover. Ideally, that suited Leighton fine. She was 32, past the age of blushing brides, and she needed to disappear from the East Coast immediately. A wagon clattered around the corner, pulled by 2 draft horses that looked as tired as the driver. The man at the reins was massive, his shoulders straining against a canvas coat. He wore a low-brimmed hat pulled down tight. He didn't park the wagon. He stopped it in the middle of the street and stared at her. He didn't climb down to help her with her bag. Leighton walked to the edge of the platform. "Mr. Holloway, I didn't send for you," the man said. His voice was like grinding gravel. "My sister did. Behind my back." Leighton didn't flinch. The ticket was paid for. The contract was signed. "Contract don't mean spit out here, lady," Bo Holloway spat, shifting his gaze to the horizon. "I got 3 hellions and a ranch that's barely standing. I don't have time to babysit a city woman. Get back on the train. It heads east in an hour." The crowd on the platform snickered. This was the show they had waited for. The rejection. Leighton placed her bag on the muddy ground. She looked at the train, then back at the man. "I have no home to return to, Mr. Holloway, and unless you plan on dragging me onto that train physically, I am staying. I suggest you load my bag, or I will walk to your ranch. I have the directions." Bo stared at her. His eyes were a startling, icy blue, surrounded by lines of exhaustion etched deep into his skin. He saw something in her face, not fear, but a desperate, cold resolve. He swore under his breath, a sharp curse that made the station master wince. "Fine. Throw the bag in, but when you run crying in 3 days, don't expect me to drive you back." The ride to the ranch was 6 miles of silence. Leighton sat rigid on the bench seat, observing the landscape. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly terrifying. The mountains rose like jagged teeth, and the valley floor was a patchwork of yellow grass and dark pines. But she noticed other things too. Fences that were broken, cattle that looked thin, a smoke plume rising from a neighbor's property that looked too thick to be a chimney. "Who lives there?" Leighton asked, pointing to a sprawling estate on a ridge they passed, a stark contrast to the disrepair she saw elsewhere. "Thaddeus Rourke," Bo said, the name leaving a bad taste in the air. "Cattle baron. He owns everything you see to the north, and he wants what's to the south." "Which is?" "My water," Bo said. "Don't talk to him. Don't look at him. If you see his riders, you go inside and you lock the door." They turned off the main road onto a rutted track. A wooden sign hung by a single nail. Holloway Ranch. As they approached the farmhouse, Leighton's heart sank. It wasn't just rustic. It was a ruin. The porch sagged. The windows were grime-streaked. Weeds grew up to the doorstep, but it was the silence that was most unnerving. There were children here, supposedly, yet there was no noise. Bo pulled the horses to a halt. "We're here. Don't say I didn't warn you." He climbed down, leaving her to navigate the high step herself. As Leighton's boot touched the dirt, the front door creaked open. 3 figures stood in the shadows of the doorway. The oldest was a boy, perhaps 14, with his father's dark hair and a shotgun resting casually in the crook of his arm. This was Colt. He looked at Leighton with pure, unadulterated hatred. Behind him stood a girl of about 10, Mavis. Her hair was a matted bird's nest, her dress torn at the hem. She chewed on a fingernail, staring at the ground, and peeking out from behind the girl was the youngest, a boy of 5 named Jeb. He was covered in mud from head to toe, holding a dead frog by one leg. "Who is she, Pa?" Colt asked, his thumb drifting near the hammer of the shotgun. "The new housekeeper," Bo muttered, walking past them without a touch or a greeting. "She's staying in the guest room. If the roof doesn't leak on her." Colt spat on the porch, missing Leighton's shoe by an inch. "She won't last," the boy said. "Not even a week." Leighton picked up her valise. She looked Colt dead in the eye. She walked past the gun, past the mud, and into the house. It smelled of stale grease, wet dog, and grief. The first night passed in an uneasy truce. Leighton had slept on a mattress that smelled of mildew, wedged a chair under the doorknob, and listened to the wind howl through the gaps in the logs. She woke before dawn. Habit from her previous life, a life she was burying deep, dictated that she rise before the sun. She dressed in her second dress, a gray cotton plain weave, and tied a white apron around her waist. The kitchen was a disaster zone. Cast iron skillets encrusted with week-old grease sat on the stove. The floor was sticky. Leighton found a bucket, pumped water from the kitchen pump, and set to work. She didn't cook breakfast immediately. She cleaned a workspace first. By the time the sun crested the peaks, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, Bo had already left for the pastures. He hadn't said a word to her, just taken a piece of dry bread and vanished. The children, however, were waking up. Leighton was kneading dough, having found a mostly clean sack of flour when she heard the floorboards creak behind her. She didn't turn. "Good morning," she said calmly. Silence. She turned around. Colt was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. Mavis was sitting at the table, staring at the empty plate. Jeb was under the table, growling like a dog. "We don't want biscuits," Colt said. "We want meat." "There is no meat in the larder," Leighton said. "Only salt pork that has turned green. I threw it out. You threw out our food?" Colt's face darkened. He took a step forward. He was tall for his age, wiry and strong. A bully in the making, shaped by a lack of guidance. "I threw out poison," Leighton corrected. "Sit down. The biscuits will be ready in 10 minutes. "I ain't taking orders from a mail-order strumpet," Colt sneered. Leighton stopped kneading. The room went very quiet. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked slowly toward the boy. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. "I am not your mother, Colt," she said softly. "I am not your friend. I am the woman making sure you don't die of scurvy or starvation. You can eat what I make, or you can starve. But if you call me that name again, I will wash your mouth out with lye soap. Do you understand?" Colt blinked. He had expected screaming. He had expected tears. He hadn't expected the cold, flat authority of a prison warden. He scoffed, trying to regain ground, but he sat down. The test came 3 hours later. Leighton had sent the children outside so she could tackle the parlor. She needed more flour for the evening meal. She went to the pantry, a dark, cool closet off the kitchen. The large wooden bin was in the corner. She reached for the lid. Wait, it was Mavis. The girl had spoken for the first time. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, her eyes wide with terror. Leighton froze, her hand inches from the lid. "What is it, Mavis?" "Don't," the girl whispered. "Colt," he put. Leighton didn't ask what. She knew the sound. A dry, raspy rattle coming from inside the bin. Colt appeared behind Mavis, a cruel grin on his face. He was waiting for the scream. He was waiting for her to run out of the house, pack her bag, and leave them alone in their misery. Leighton slowly withdrew her hand. She looked at the bin, then at Colt. "A timber rattler?" she asked conversationally. "Or a diamondback?" Colt's grin faltered. "Big one. Angry too." "I see." Leighton walked back to her valise, which sat near the door. She unlocked the small, heavy wooden box. From it, she withdrew a Webley Bulldog revolver, short-barreled, heavy, and lethal. She walked back to the pantry. "Hey," Colt said, stepping forward, suddenly unsure. "Hey, don't shoot up the bin. That's good wood." Leighton kicked the lid of the bin open with her boot. The snake struck instantly, a blur of motion rising from the white powder. Crack. The sound was deafening in the small kitchen. Mavis screamed and covered her ears. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the scent of rising dough. Leighton peered into the bin. The snake lay thrashing in the flour, its head removed cleanly by the bullet. She holstered the revolver in her apron pocket. She turned to a pale-faced Colt. "Get the shovel," she ordered. "Remove the carcass. Then you will sift this flour. If I find a single scale or drop of blood in tonight's bread, you will eat the entire loaf yourself." Colt stared at her, his mouth slightly open. He looked at the gun in her apron, then at her face. The defiance was gone, replaced by shock. "Who are you?" he whispered. "I told you," Leighton said, turning back to the stove. "I'm the housekeeper. Now get the shovel." That evening, when Beau returned, the house smelled different. It smelled of fresh bread and roasted root vegetables. The table was set. The floor was swept. He walked in, dusting the dirt from his hat, and stopped dead. Colt was sitting at the table, silently sifting flour into a bowl. Mavis was washing dishes. Jeb was actually sitting in a chair. Beau looked at Leighton. She was serving plates, her face impassive. "What happened here?" Beau asked, eyeing his son's subdued behavior. "We had a pest problem," Leighton said, placing a plate of hot food before him. "It has been handled. Eat your dinner, Mr. Holloway." Beau sat. He took a bite of the bread. It was good. Better than good. He looked at Colt, expecting the boy to complain, to kick up a fuss, as he always did when authority was asserted. Colt just ate, his eyes occasionally darting to Leighton's apron pocket where the heavy weight of the Webley still pulled at the fabric. For the first time in 2 years, there was silence in the Holloway house. But it wasn't the silence of grief. It was the silence of anticipation. They had survived day 2. But the valley had ears, and the gunshot had been loud. The rumor mill in the Bitterroot Valley moved faster than the telegraph. By Wednesday morning, day 3, everyone in town knew that Beau Holloway's new woman carried a British revolver and knew how to use it. Leighton needed supplies. The larder was still critically low on staples that couldn't be hunted or grown. She harnessed the wagon herself, much to the surprise of Beau, who watched from the barn. "I'm going to town," she announced. "I'm taking Mavis and Jeb. Colt can help you with the herd." "You can't handle the team," Beau said, leaning on a pitchfork. "Those are draft horses, not carriage ponies. I grew up in Kentucky, Mr. Holloway." Leighton lied smoothly. She was actually from Philadelphia, but she had learned to drive a team hauling supply wagons during a stint in the Dakotas she preferred not to mention. "I can handle them." She motioned for the 2 younger children to climb up. Mavis did so hesitantly. Jeb scrambled up, excited to be going anywhere. The drive to town was tense. Mavis sat rigidly next to Leighton, clutching a rag doll that was missing an arm. "Does your father ever smile, Mavis?" Leighton asked gently, keeping her eyes on the road. Mavis shook her head. "Not since Mama went in the river." Leighton's hands tightened on the reins. The river. The letter had said, accident, but locals usually said drowned or fell. Went in the river implied something else, something voluntary. When they arrived in town, the atmosphere had shifted. On her arrival, there had been mockery. Now, there was curiosity. Men on the boardwalks tipped their hats, but their eyes were wary. Leighton led the children into the general store. It was a cluttered space, smelling of coffee beans and leather. The proprietor, a balding man named Mr. Abernathy, looked up and adjusted his spectacles. "Mrs. Holloway?" he asked, then corrected himself. "Miss Coulter, I mean. Miss Coulter is fine. I need 50 pounds of flour, 10 pounds of sugar, coffee, and fabric. Sturdy cotton. Put it on Beau's tab?" Abernathy asked, hesitating. "Yes. Is there a problem?" "Well, Beau. He's reached his limit, ma'am. Mr. Rourke, he owns the banknote on the store now, and he sent word. No more credit for the Holloway place." Leighton felt the heat rise in her neck. It was a squeeze. Economic strangulation. "I have cash," Leighton said, reaching into her reticule. It was her escape money, her safety net, but she couldn't let the children see her fail. She slapped 3 gold coins on the counter. This should cover it. Abernathy's eyes widened. "Yes, ma'am. More than enough." As they were loading the wagon, a shadow fell over them. 3 men on horseback blocked the street. The man in the center wore a suit that cost more than the Holloway ranch. He had silver hair, a carefully trimmed mustache, and eyes like flint. Thaddeus Rourke. He looked down at Leighton, ignoring the children. "You must be the new help." Leighton placed a sack of sugar in the wagon bed. She dusted her hands. "I am. You're wasting your money, my dear," Rourke said, his voice like oiled silk. "That ranch is a sinking ship. Beau Holloway is a broken man. He'll be foreclosed on by winter. You'd be best to take the next train out." "I've unpacked, Mr. Rourke," Leighton said. "I don't like packing twice." Rourke chuckled, but it wasn't a happy sound. He leaned over his saddle horn. "I heard about the snake. Impressive. But out here, we have dangers bigger than rattlers. Accidents happen. Barns burn. Water goes bad." He was threatening the children. Leighton saw Mavis trembling, pressing herself against the wagon wheel. Leighton walked around the horse until she was standing by Rourke's stirrup. She looked up. "Mr. Rourke," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "I am not a cowboy. I am not a rancher. You think you are dealing with a frightened spinster. But if you touch these children, or if you light a match near that property, you will find that I am something entirely different. I know how men like you die." Rourke stiffened. For a second, the mask of the civilized baron slipped, revealing a thug. "Is that a threat?" "It's an advisory," Leighton said loudly, stepping back. "Good day." "Sir?" She climbed into the wagon, snapped the reins, and drove past them without looking back. But as they left town, Leighton looked in the rear view. One of Rourke's men was following them, not to attack, but to watch. The war had begun. Thursday brought rain, a cold, relentless downpour that turned the ranch yard into a quagmire. The children were stuck inside. Leighton used the time to scrub the master bedroom. Beau had moved into the bunkhouse months ago, leaving the main room untouched since his wife's death. It was a shrine to dust. While scrubbing the floor near the window, Leighton's brush caught on a loose board. It wasn't just loose. It had been pried up and set back hastily. Curiosity, a trait that had gotten Leighton into trouble her whole life, took over. She used a knife to lift the slat. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather-bound journal. Leighton sat back on her heels. She knew she shouldn't read it. It was an invasion of privacy, but Rourke's threat about accidents and Mavis's comment about the river were gnawing at her. She opened the book. The handwriting was elegant, but shaky. The 12th of June, 1885. Thaddeus came by again while Beau was branding in the high pasture. He offered money. Then he offered threats. He says he knows about the water table. He says if we don't sell, he'll make sure Beau never sells a head of cattle again. Leighton flipped forward. August 3. Omiopsute opsich, shichinch. I found a dead calf near the creek, poisoned. Rourke's foreman was watching from the ridge. I didn't tell Bo. He's already so angry. If he fights Rourke, Rourke will kill him. I have to protect them. September 7th, 1829. He cornered me in town. He said he has the deed to the water rights, a forgery. He says he will show it to the judge unless I meet him. I'm going to the river crossing tomorrow. I have to beg him to stop. The entries ended there. Leighton closed the book, her blood running cold. Bo's wife, Sarah, hadn't committed suicide. She hadn't fallen. She had gone to meet Rourke, and she never came back. The door to the bedroom slammed open. Leighton jumped, shoving the journal under her apron. Bo stood there, dripping wet, his face thunderous. "What are you doing in here?" "Cleaning," Leighton said, her heart hammering. "The dust was—" "I told you this room was closed," Bo shouted. He walked over, grabbed her arm, and hauled her toward the door. "Stay out of here. Stay out of my past. Bo." "Stop." Leighton wrenched her arm free. "It's not about the past. It's about right now. Rourke didn't just want the land. He killed her." The silence that followed was heavier than the rain. Bo stared at her, his chest heaving. "What did you say?" "Your wife," Leighton whispered. "She went to meet Rourke the day she died, to protect you." "You're a liar," Bo hissed. "She was sick. She was sad. She jumped." "Did she?" Leighton pulled the journal from her apron. She held it out. "Read it." Bo looked at the book as if it were a venomous snake. He recognized the binding. He reached out a trembling hand and took it. He opened it to the last page. As he read, the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He collapsed onto the edge of the bed, the man who had held himself together with anger suddenly crumbling under the weight of truth. "He killed her," Bo whispered. "For water." "He killed her," Leighton agreed softly. "And now he wants to finish the job." Bo looked up, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "What do we do?" "He owns the sheriff. He owns the judge. If I ride over there and shoot him, they'll hang me, and the kids will be orphans." Leighton Coulter's eyes hardened. The matron, the housekeeper, the spinster was gone. In her place was the strategist. "We don't shoot him, Bo," she said. "We don't give him the satisfaction of a martyr's death. We destroy him. We take his reputation, his money, and his freedom. And I know exactly how to do it." "How?" Bo asked, looking at this woman he had tried to send away 3 days ago. "We need to send a telegram," Leighton said, "to the United States Marshal's office in Denver. And we need to survive until they get here." At that moment, the sound of breaking glass shattered the conversation. "Pa!" Colt screamed from the kitchen. "Fire! The barn's on fire!" Leighton ran to the window. Through the rain, orange flames were licking up the side of the barn. "Rourke!" Bo growled, grabbing his rifle. "No," Leighton said, grabbing his arm. "That's what he wants. He wants you to run out there so his men can pick you off in the dark. It's an ambush. My horses are in there." "Colt can get the horses out the back," Leighton commanded. "You and I are going to hold the house. Tonight, Mr. Holloway, we are under siege." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the Webley. "How much ammunition do you have?" Bo looked at the gun, then at her. A strange respect flickered in his eyes. "Enough," he said. "Good," Leighton said, blowing out the lantern. "Welcome to the war." The rain was a blessing and a curse. It kept the barn fire from spreading instantly to the house, but it also slicked the yard with mud and obscured the sight lines, turning the night into a chaotic blur of shadows and steam. "Mavis, take Jeb into the root cellar," Leighton commanded, her voice cutting through the panic in the kitchen. "Do not come out until I open that door. Do you understand?" Mavis, pale but focused, grabbed her little brother's hand and dragged him toward the trap door in the pantry floor. "Colt," Leighton turned to the boy. He was holding the shotgun, his knuckles white. "The horses are panicking. If they aren't let out the back paddock gates, they'll die in the stalls. Can you get there without being seen?" Colt swallowed hard, looking at the wall of orange flame that was his father's livelihood burning down. "Yes, ma'am. I can wiggle through the irrigation ditch. Go. Don't engage anyone. Open the gate, slap the rumps, and get back to the house. The boy vanished into the rainy darkness of the back porch. Leighton moved to the front parlor window where Bo was crouched, his Winchester rifle propped on the sill. Outside, figures moved against the fiery backdrop of the barn. They were shooting blindly at the house, bullets thudding into the heavy log walls, shattering glass in the upstairs bedrooms. Bo fired. A man near the burning wagon yelped and spun away into the darkness. They're trying to flank us. Bo grunted, ejecting a spent casing. Two of them moving toward the creek bed. Leighton didn't just watch. She moved to his side, placing a box of cartridges on the floor. As he fired, she began reloading his cartridge belt with practiced ease, her fingers moving with mechanical precision in the dark. Bo glanced at her during a lull in the shooting. The flickering light from the fire illuminated her face. It was set like stone, devoid of fear, entirely focused on the mechanics of survival. "You didn't learn to load a repeater like that in a Philadelphia drawing room," he said hoarsely. "My father wasn't a banker, Bo," Leighton murmured, sliding, 44 to 40 rounds into the loops. "He was an operative for the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. I grew up in archives, sorting case files on train robbers and embezzlers. He taught me that the only difference between a victim and a survivor is preparation. Rourke isn't a businessman. He's a criminal. I've studied his type my whole life." A bullet smashed through the window frame inches from Bo's head, showering them with wood splinters. He cursed and returned fire. "They're getting bolder," he said. "They know the rain is damping down the fire. They're losing their light." Suddenly, a scream tore through the night. It wasn't an attacker. It was Colt. Leighton scrambled to the kitchen window, looking out the back. The barn was a roaring inferno now, the roof beginning to collapse inward. Through the smoke, she saw Colt near the paddock fence. He had gotten the horses out, but a large man in a slicker had cut him off before he could reach the house. The man had Colt by the collar of his jacket, shaking him. "Bo! The back!" Leighton yelled. Bo rushed into the kitchen, but his angle was bad. "I can't get a clear shot. The smoke is too thick." The attacker raised a pistol to pistol-whip the boy. Leighton didn't hesitate. She brushed past Bo, raising the heavy Webley bulldog she had taken from her lockbox. It was a short-range weapon, notorious for its kick, meant for close-quarters defense in city alleyways, not 50-yard shots in the Montana rain. She braced her wrist on the window frame, took a breath, and held it. She aimed not at the man, but slightly above and to the left of him, compensating for the distance and the brutal recoil she knew was coming. She squeezed the trigger. The boom of the heavy-caliber British revolver was deeper than the crack of the Winchester. In the yard, the man holding Colt reeled backward, clutching his shoulder, his pistol falling into the mud. "Run, Colt!" Leighton screamed. The boy scrambled free, slipping and sliding through the muck until he crashed through the kitchen door, gasping for air, soaked and terrified. Bo looked at Leighton. Smoke curled from the barrel of her revolver. "You hit him," Bo whispered in disbelief. "With a snub nose at 50 yards in the rain." "I aimed for his head," Leighton said tightly, her hand trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "I missed low. I need more practice." The shooting outside stopped. The attackers, realizing they were facing organized resistance and having lost the element of surprise, were pulling back. The sound of galloping hooves faded toward Rourke's estate. The three of them stood in the kitchen as the adrenaline crashed. The only sound was the roaring of the fire consuming the last of the barn and the steady drum of the rain. Bo looked at his son, muddy and bruised, then at the woman who had arrived only 4 days ago. The woman he had tried to send back. "They'll be back," Bo said. "Rourke won't stop now. He can't. He knows we have the journal." "No," Leighton agreed, holstering the warm gun in her apron. "Tomorrow, he tries to finish it. Tomorrow, we have to go on the offensive." Friday morning broke gray and acrid with the smell of wet ash. The Holloway Ranch was a scorched scar on the landscape. The barn was gone, along with the winter hay and the tack. They were alive, but they were crippled. They gathered around the kitchen table. Mavis, having emerged from the cellar, sat clinging to Layton's side. Colt was cleaning the mud off the shotgun. "The journal is the key," Layton said, placing the leather-bound book in the center of the table. "But it's useless here. Rourke owns the local judge. If we take this to town, it will disappear before sunset, and so will we. We have to get it to the federal authorities," Bo said. "Denver. That means a telegram. Rourke controls the telegraph office in Hamilton," Colt piped up. "Mr. Davies runs the key, and he owes Rourke gambling money. He'll send the wire straight to Rourke's desk." Layton nodded. She had anticipated this. "Then we don't send it from Hamilton. We send it from Darby. It's 20 miles south. The roads will be watched," Bo said. "Rourke has riders patrolling the valley floor." "I'll go," Layton said. "No," Bo said immediately. "It's too dangerous. It's less dangerous for me than it is for you, Bo. Rourke wants you dead. To him, I'm just a nuisance. Besides, if I'm stopped, I can play the role of the frightened city woman fleeing the violence. You can't play that role." Bo looked at her. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper than ever, but the despair that had haunted him on Monday was gone, replaced by a hard, glittering anger. "I can't let you do this alone." "She won't be alone." Colt stood up. He looked older than 14 today. "I know the trails along the foothills better than Rourke's hired guns. I can get us to Darby without using the main road." Bo looked at his son. A week ago, he would have laughed at the idea. Today, he saw the steel in the boy's spine. "Take the roan mare and the paint," Bo said, his voice thick. "They're the fastest we have left." He turned to Layton. "If you get through, who do we send it to?" Layton pulled a small, silver pencil from her pocket and wrote a name on a scrap of paper. "Marshal Bass Reeves. He operates out of the Arkansas Territory right now, but he has federal jurisdiction that supersedes anything in Montana Territory. My father worked with him once. He's incorruptible, and he hates men like Rourke." The preparations were swift. Layton sewed the journal into the lining of her heavy riding coat. She tucked her Webley into her saddlebag. Bo stood on the porch as Layton mounted up. He reached up and gripped her hand. It was the first time he had intentionally touched her. His hand was calloused, warm, and rough. "Come back," he said. It wasn't an order. It was a plea. "Keep them safe till Sunday," Layton replied. "If we aren't back by noon on Sunday, take the children into the mountains and don't look back." She turned the horse, and she and Colt galloped south toward the tree line. The ride was brutal. Colt led them off the beaten path, up into the rocky foothills of the Bitterroots, navigating game trails that were barely wide enough for a horse. They rode in silence, the tension thick between them. They were 5 miles outside of Darby when their luck ran out. The trail they were on intersected with an old logging road. As they emerged from the trees, 3 riders were waiting. It wasn't Rourke's usual thugs. It was Sheriff Brody, a man with a tin star pinned to his duster and a weak chin hidden by a bushy beard. "Whoa there, boy," the sheriff called out, blocking the path. "Where you off to in such a hurry, young Holloway? And with the new lady friend?" Colt reined in his horse, his hand drifting toward the shotgun in his scabbard. "Don't," Layton whispered sharply. She plastered a look of wide-eyed terror on her face. "Sheriff," Layton cried out, her voice trembling. "Thank heavens, we are fleeing for our lives. The Holloway ranch was attacked last night. Fire and gunfire. It was madness." Sheriff Brody rode closer, eyeing them suspiciously. "Is that a fact? Mr. Rourke told me Bo Holloway started a fire himself for the insurance money." "Insurance?" Layton laughed hysterically. "That man doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Sheriff, please, I just want to get to the train station in Darby and go back east. This country is barbarous." Brody looked at Colt. "That true, boy? You escorting her to leave?" "She's scared, Sheriff," Colt said, managing to sound sullen. "Pa said to get her out of his hair." Brody seemed to buy it. He relaxed slightly. "Well now, that's probably best. But I got orders to check everyone traveling today. Rourke thinks Bo might try to move some stolen goods. You got anything in those saddlebags, ma'am?" "Just my personal effects," Layton said. clutching her coat tighter. "Mind if I look?" Brody leaned over from his saddle, reaching for her bag. Leighton knew that if he found the Webley, the game was up, and if he searched her person, he'd find the journal. She had to act. As Brody's hand touched her saddlebag, Leighton didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, she jammed her riding crop hard into the sensitive flank of Brody's horse. The horse squealed and bucked violently. Brody, caught off guard, was thrown from the saddle, landing heavily in the mud. "Go," Leighton shouted, spurring her own horse forward. Colt didn't need telling twice. They blasted past the two surprised deputies before they could even draw their weapons. Shots rang out behind them, whistling through the pine branches. But they were already galloping full tilt down the road to Darby. They didn't stop until they reached the telegraph office, their horses lathered and blowing hard. Leighton stumbled inside, tore the lining of her coat open, and extracted the journal and the paper with the marshal's name. The telegraph operator, a young man with ink-stained fingers, looked up in surprise at the disheveled woman and the fierce-eyed boy. "I need to send a wire," Leighton panted, slamming money onto the counter. "To Marshal Bass Reeves. Priority federal business. And then I need you to transmit the contents of this book, verbatim." The operator looked at the journal, then at the gold coins. "That's a lot of words, ma'am. It'll cost you." "Send it," Leighton said. Every damn word. Sunday morning broke with a deceptive, crystalline peace. The storm had passed, leaving the Bitterroot Valley scrubbed clean, the sky a piercing, relentless blue. But down at the Holloway Ranch, the air didn't smell of pine or damp earth. It smelled of wet ash and gun oil. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't the quiet of rest. It was the held breath before a scream. Beau Holloway sat on the top step of his porch, the wood damp against his trousers. He had spent the last hour meticulously cleaning his Winchester, 1873, wiping soot from the receiver and checking the action until it cycled with a deadly, fluid smoothness. He wasn't a praying man, not since Sarah died, but as he looked out over the blackened skeleton of his barn, he found himself bargaining with a God he wasn't sure was listening. "Take me," he thought, the plea running through his mind like a chant. "Let them take the land. Let them take the water. Just let the children live." Inside the house, the atmosphere was suffocating. The windows had been boarded up with salvaged timber from the ruined corral, turning the farmhouse into a dark, claustrophobic fortress. Mavis sat at the kitchen table, her small hands clutching Sarah's worn leather Bible. She wasn't reading it. She was holding it like a shield. Jeb was asleep on the floor, curled up on a rug, blissfully unaware that this might be his last morning. Beau stood up, his knees cracking. He scanned the northern horizon. He knew Leighton and Colt had made it to the tree line on Friday, but the silence from the south was deafening. If the telegraph hadn't gone out, or worse, if Rourke's men had intercepted them on the return trip, then there was no cavalry coming. There was only Beau, a half box of ammunition, and a death wish. At 10 o'clock, the earth began to tremble. It started as a low vibration in the soles of his boots, then grew into the rhythmic, thunderous drumming of hooves. A dust cloud rose against the mountains, a dirty smudge on the perfect day. They didn't come stealthily. Thaddeus Rourke wanted the valley to see this. He wanted witnesses to his power, if not his crimes. 12 riders crested the ridge and descended toward the house. They fanned out in a military skirmish line, blocking the escape routes to the east and west. In the center rode Rourke himself. He was dressed not for a range war, but for church, or perhaps a funeral. He wore a charcoal wool suit, a silk cravat, and polished boots that gleamed in the sunlight. It was a grotesque display of civilization amidst the brutality. They reined in 50 yards from the porch. The horses snorted, their breath pluming in the chill air. Rourke adjusted his gloves, his expression one of bored irritation, as if he were dealing with a stubborn tenant rather than a man whose life he was about to extinguish. "Morning, Beau," Rourke called out. His voice carried easily across the yard. "Sad business about the barn. Terrible tragedy. Looks like you're finally finished." Beau didn't raise his voice. He shifted the rifle slightly, the barrel pointing at the dirt but ready to snap up in a heartbeat. "I'm still standing on my own dirt, Thaddeus, And I'm still breathing. For the moment, Rourke agreed, a cruel smile touching his lips. But we both know how this ends. I'm a reasonable man, Bo. I'm here to make you a final offer. A generous one, considering the circumstances. He gestured to the devastating landscape. Sign the deed over to me. Today. Right now. I have the papers in my saddlebag. You take your brats. I give you $500, and you get on a train. You leave Montana and you never look back. And the woman? Bo asked, his voice grinding like gravel. Rourke's face hardened instantly. The mask of the benevolent baron slipped. The woman is a problem. She's been spreading vicious lies in town. She doesn't leave the valley. She stays here to answer for the arson she committed against your property. It was a lie so bold it took Bo's breath away. Rourke intended to kill Leighton and frame her for the fire his own men had started. Go to hell, Bo spat. The front door creaked open behind him. Stay inside, Bo barked without turning around. But the footsteps didn't stop. Mavis Holloway stepped onto the porch. She looked tiny against the rough-hewn logs of the cabin, her dress stained with soot, her hair matted. But her eyes, usually cast down in fear, were fixed on Thaddeus Rourke with a terrifying intensity. She held the Bible to her chest with both hands. No, Papa, Mavis said. Her voice was thin, trembling, but it didn't break. Get back inside, Mavis, Bo pleaded, his heart hammering against his ribs. Don't let him see you. He's seen me before, Mavis said softly. She walked to the edge of the porch steps, past her father's protective reach. Rourke laughed, a sharp, barking sound that grated on the nerves. And what would a little mute like you have to say? Go play with your dolls, girl, while the men talk business. My mama didn't fall in the river, Mavis said. The words were spoken quietly, but they seemed to echo off the canyon walls. The laughter died in Rourke's throat. His horse pinned its ears back, sensing the sudden tension in its rider. I know you met her there, Mavis continued, her voice gaining strength, fueled by 2 years of nightmare silence. I know because I followed her that day. I was hiding in the reeds. I saw you grab her arm. I saw you demand the papers, and when she said no, I saw you push her. Bo stared at his daughter, the world tilting on its axis. The grief that had bowed his shoulders for 2 years suddenly transmuted into a white-hot, blinding rage. It wasn't suicide. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. And his little girl had carried the weight of that witness alone, terrified into silence by the monster sitting on the horse in front of them. You lying little witch, Rourke stammered, his face turning a violent, mottled purple. The veneer of the gentleman vanished completely. She's lying. She's mad, just like her mother. I saw you, Mavis screamed, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. You held her under. You killed her, Rourke snapped. The threat to his reputation, to his freedom, was too great. He clawed at the holster on his hip. Kill them, Rourke shrieked, his voice cracking. Kill them all. Burn the house down with them inside. His men, hardened mercenaries, hesitated for a fraction of a second at the order to murder a child. But money was money. 12 rifles began to rise. Bo stepped in front of his daughter, jacking around into the chamber of his Winchester. He knew he could take 2, maybe 3 of them before they cut him down. He braced himself for the impact of the bullets. Crack. A single rifle shot tore through the valley, sharp and authoritative. It didn't come from Rourke's men, and it didn't come from Bo. The hat flew off the head of Rourke's foreman, spinning wildly into the air before landing in the mud. The foreman yelped, ducking instinctively, looking around in confusion. Hold your fire, a deep voice boomed. Everyone froze. Slowly, every head turned toward the high ridge that overlooked the ranch yard. Silhouetted against the blinding morning sun were 4 riders. They sat motionless, like statues carved from the mountain itself. As the lead rider nudged his horse forward, descending the slope with a slow, deliberate cadence, the sunlight caught the silver star pinned to his duster. It flashed like a warning beacon. It was a U.S. Marshall's badge. And the man wearing it was a legend. Bass Reeves sat tall in the saddle, a massive figure with a dense mustache and eyes that had seen everything the frontier had to offer. He held a Winchester resting casually on his saddle horn, the barrel pointing generally at Rourke's chest. Behind him came a wagon. Leighton Coulter held the reins, her face pale but set in grim determination. Beside her sat Colt, looking exhausted, mud-spattered, but holding his head high. Thaddeus Rourke. Reeves's voice resonated across the distance, calm and undeniable. "Drop that weapon, or the next shot takes your ear off." Rourke looked around wildly. His men were lowering their rifles. They knew who Bass Reeves was. They knew that the invincible Marshal had brought in over 3,000 felons and never been wounded. They were hired guns, willing to bully farmers, but they weren't suicidal enough to start a war with the federal government. "This is my land," Rourke screamed, waving his pearl-handled revolver, saliva flying from his lips. "You have no jurisdiction here. I am the law, in this valley." "Not anymore," Reeves said, continuing his relentless approach. "I have a sworn affidavit wired from the telegraph office in Derby. I have the contents of a journal belonging to the late Sarah Halloway, detailing extortion and fraud." Reeves stopped his horse 10 feet from Rourke. He looked at Mavis, who was still standing on the porch, trembling in her father's arms. "And now," Reeves said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble, "it seems I have an eyewitness to a federal capital crime." Rourke looked at his men. They were backing their horses away, leaving him isolated in the center of the yard. He looked at Leighton, who had stopped the wagon and was climbing down. The woman he had dismissed as a weak Easterner had outmaneuvered him. Panic, cold and irrational, seized him. Rourke roared in incoherent rage and raised his pistol, aiming not at the Marshal, but at Leighton, the architect of his ruin. The movement was fast, but Bass Reeves was faster. Reeves didn't even seem to aim. He fired from the hip. The shot was a deafening roar. The bullet struck Rourke's right hand, shattering the pearl grip of the revolver and obliterating the bones of his fingers. The gun flew into the dirt. Rourke shrieked, clutching his mangled hand to his chest, and fell from his saddle, writhing in the mud he had tried to steal. "Secure him," Reeves ordered his deputies, holstering his rifle as if he had merely swatted a fly. The sun was beginning to dip below the peaks of the Bitterroots by the time the dust settled. Rourke and his foreman were in irons, loaded into the back of the Marshal's prisoner wagon for the long haul to the federal courthouse in Denver. The rest of the gang had scattered to the wind, fleeing the territory. The silence that fell over the Halloway ranch now was different. It wasn't heavy or fearful. It was the exhausted, hollow silence of survival. Leighton stood on the porch, leaning against the railing. She had changed back into her navy blue serge dress, the one she had arrived in. It was cleaned and pressed, her hair pulled back in its severe bun. She watched the purple shadows lengthen across the valley floor. The front door opened, and Beau stepped out. He moved slowly, the adrenaline of the week finally leaving his muscles. He held a small, heavy velvet pouch in his hand. He came to stand beside her, looking out at the charred ruins of the barn. "Neighbors came by while you were resting," Beau said quietly. "Abernathy from the store, even the banker. They offered to help raise a new barn next week. Said they have plenty of lumber." "They knew," Leighton said, her voice devoid of bitterness, just stating a fact. "They were just afraid. Fear makes good people do nothing, Beau, until someone shows them it's safe to be brave." Beau nodded. He looked at her profile, the sharp nose, the determined chin, the eyes that had seen his children through hell. He opened the drawstring of the pouch and poured a stream of heavy gold coins into his calloused palm. They clinked softly, a sound of wealth and possibility. "This is your wages," Beau said, extending his hand. "And enough extra for a ticket back to St. Louis. First class. Maybe even enough to set you up in a small house of your own back east. The train leaves tomorrow at 9. Leighton looked at the gold. It was more money than she had seen in her entire life. It represented safety. It represented a return to the orderly, quiet world of archives and paved streets. She looked at the coins, glistening in the dying light. Then she looked at the yard. She saw Colt showing Jeb how to clean a bridle near the water pump. She saw Mavis sitting on the swing, her face peaceful for the first time in years. She looked at Bo, a man who had been broken but was now standing tall, his eyes clear and filled with a terrifying amount of hope. Leighton reached out. Her fingers brushed his palm, sending a jolt through him. She took the gold. Then, with a casual flick of her wrist, she tossed the coins over the railing. They landed with wet plops in the mud of the ranch yard, burying themselves in the earth. Bo stared at her, his mouth falling open. He looked at the mud, then back at her face, stunned. "What are you doing?" That's a fortune." Leighton dusted off her hands on her apron. She turned to him, a small, crooked smile playing on her lips. "The agency agreement was for 1 year, Mr. Holloway," she said briskly. "I don't break contracts. You still have 51 weeks of my services remaining, and I expect room and board to be included." Bo stood there for a long moment, processing the woman standing before him. Slowly, the shock faded, replaced by a smile that started in his eyes and transformed his entire face. It was the first genuine smile Leighton had seen from him, a smile that made him look 10 years younger, a smile that promised trouble and joy in equal measure. "We're going to need a bigger garden," Bo said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm going to need someone to teach me how to shoot that British bulldog of yours. I've never seen a shot like that." Leighton's smile widened, warm and real. "I think that can be arranged, Bo. But first, dinner is in 20 minutes. Roast chicken. Wash up." She turned and walked back into the house. The door didn't creak this time. As she stepped inside, the house didn't smell of grief or stale air anymore. It smelled of roasting meat, wood smoke, and the undeniable scent of home. They had sent her to a broken man with 3 feral children, expecting her to run. But Leighton Coulter didn't run. She had planted her feet in the Montana dirt, and she wasn't moving for anyone. And that is the story of Leighton Coulter's first week in the Bitterroot Valley. She arrived as an unwanted package and ended up saving a family, bringing down a tyrant, and proving that sometimes the toughest thing in the Wild West wasn't a cowboy with a 6-shooter, but a woman with a plan and the courage to see it through. If you enjoyed this story of grit, justice, and hard-won romance, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with anyone who loves a good Western drama, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story from the frontier. Thanks for watching.